My name is Carmi Palafox, an urban planner and economist. Welcome to Beyond Places, the podcast about the planning, design, and leadership of the communities and cities that we call home.
Welcome to Beyond Places. I'm really excited to welcome our first guest. So he is the president of Ernst Valery Investments, a private minority-owned real estate investment firm that he established in the US in 2001. For 20 years, he has been involved with projects ranging from mixed-use developments, multi-tenant rental properties, single-family renovations, and condominium conversions. Ernst has extensive experience in affordable and market rate housing development and investment. He has successfully invested in and developed real estate in Maryland, Washington, D.C., New York, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and California. He is also active in social entrepreneurship and volunteer work that have addressed housing finance needs in Haiti, as well as efforts in incubating business around the world that help alleviate poverty and increase the earning potential of low-income families, individuals, and communities. Welcome, Ernst.
Thank you so much, Carmi.
It's so nice to see you again. So we haven't seen each other since 2018 when we did the advisory panel in Detroit.
It's been a while, and some of the things that we were discussing in Detroit, it sort of, come through fruition or manifested themselves in the U.S. and abroad in terms of inequalities and how different communities are treated.
Yes. So looking forward very much to this discussion with you about the work that you do in terms of investing in equitable communities. Can you please describe your work as a real estate investor and developer?
So to me, I started learning development as an architect and then as an urban planner. So for me, it's really about building beautiful things. But then the urban planning is you have to build functional things, and you have to also build things that respond to the needs of the people and not just things that make a lot of money. And so I actually got to development, the business side of it last. And so that's why you'll see when we build, it's really first and foremost, are we building something that will kind of last through the ages in terms of how it looks? But then we also want to build something that responds to what the local people need. So our entire platform is about development without displacement. And so how do we go into a community and enhance it as opposed to displacing people and trying to maximize dollars? Because the business side, as I've learned it, is really about how do you maximize dollars, and it doesn't matter what happens to the people, even though it's shown time and time again, the people who do that, who develop that way, it's a short-term view because those cities or those developments may work. And, have you seen a new subdivision that works for 5 years because it's new? And then suddenly, through the next 10 years or 15 years, it doesn't really fit. But that's something that was just dropped into a community, and it wasn't something that enhanced the community, or it wasn't something that was built with really good intentions. It was built to maximize dollars and then move on. And I feel like if planners were the developers, we'd have better cities. It's just unfortunate we've had greed lead development, and we've had capital and capital that doesn't really understand architecture, doesn't really understand planning. We've had that lead developments, and you see the transportation doesn't work, and it's not built for people. Like some places are built for cars first and foremost, and cars don't generate anything. It's like the people that are there, they don't want cars just going through. And you have certain cities in the US where you have one way ins and one way outs, these one ways. And if you had simply, created space for bicycles for people, you would have a healthier community. But those places are the ones that have been ignored. They're just the byways. They're not, they weren't intended. It's if someone to get to point A and point B, ignoring the fact that there are people in between. And that's been on purpose, and it's largely in the United States, it's happened to communities of colors. A lot of communities of color have been completely decimated. They were healthy communities, and it's just someone came in and said, well, these people aren't worth it. And so we're just going to cut through. There's nothing there, ignoring that there's always something there. It's just, do you have the care to figure out what it is and how to build with what's there?
Have you found in your work that there's a direct correlation between, places that have high inequality as well as places with, low quality of life or low connectivity and accessibility in terms of transport connections and access to jobs and to quality homes?
Yeah, I mean, the two are 110% correlated. They go hand in hand. Uh, the inequalities are the things that drive investment or the lack of investment. It's really saying, and the funny thing is, Carmi, it's when you don't invest in all of your people, it's actually a negative thing. We keep acting. I took Econ 101 when I was a freshman in college, and the simplest rule that I learned that still matters today is make the pie bigger as opposed to trying to get a bigger piece of the pie. And I think the fallacy of that way of thinking, saying, well, those people don't have money, let's not build for them, is the fact that if you build for them, the people with money would actually get a larger pie and they would ultimately make more. But we always have this mentality of, I've got to get my piece larger. And at the end of the day, we keep building on a really weak foundation. And then society ultimately falls apart when you have these stark inequalities, which ultimately, you could be far away from the inequality. But as, population and moves to urban centers, like we end up being neighbors, right? And then when you can't tell lies any longer about why someone is poor, right? So in the US, we tell the great lie is the concept of white. The vast majority of dirt poor people in this country, in the United States of America, is white folks. And the way the oligarch or the people that have like the 2% of all the money and all the power, the way they keep them completely poor is by saying, look at these minorities, no matter how poor you are, you're better than them. So they've created what I call the concept of white. And so that's why in the US, you have a president that's able to win that has nothing, he shares nothing with his base, right? Like his kids will never go to school with their kids. They will never end up at having a beer together, but they vote for him because he's been able to like tap into that concept of white. And so it's a lie. And so society tells you these lies. And I think with social media and with just people waking up and being right next to each other, they're going to start to recognize that these lies are for what they are, which is you're being lied to that you're better than that person or that person, and that there's a small group of people that want the entire pie for themselves. And I feel
Yes.
like the way we develop, we're acknowledging that we need to make the pie larger, and inclusion is our path forward. Inclusion and meritocracy. And meritocracy meaning let's go find the geniuses in all these zip codes. And I think we've stopped advancing as a society the second it was only the rich person's child that can innovate, that can have a pathway to education. What made the United States of America great and what it's failing to recognize is that the poor kid starting a business in their garage is what made America great. And we basically just went to this private school model, like only if you go to a certain school, and I'm not even talking college, like they're talking what private school did you go to? And so I think education and giving people a platform that they can all succeed is truly key.
So I wanted to take us back to, how this all started for you. Was it you were always aware and conscious of these inequalities, and then you thought about, okay, what career path would enable me to be an instrument and make a positive contribution? Or have you always wanted to work in, creating these beautiful buildings and communities and places, and then you thought, okay, I should be developing differently?
So what came first? It's a progression of things. In high school, I wanted to be an architect and build beautiful and cool buildings, and I got into that. And then I got to college, and it was like, wait, it's more than just buildings. I was really into serving people, and so urban planning was this new thing. And it's funny because not everyone gets to understand what an urban planner is. And I think 99% of high school seniors don't know what it is. And so when I figured out what it was, I was like, I love this. But then planning had its limitations because planners don't like numbers. And so planners don't know how to actually bring the money together and how to build it. And so, you know, I saw that planners were working for politicians. So I thought policy was, so I actually did a master's in public administration thinking that policy would be the path forward. But ultimately, I saw policy is too slow and it doesn't respond to someone's needs today. And people were suffering in communities. And ultimately, the real estate degree and me getting into development, it was, I want to execute on these things. And so, who gets to execute on these things but developers, basically? Developers, they bring their capital together, and next thing you know, they bring the politics and everything. In like 3 to 4 or 5 years, they're building on major things. And so, to me, it was a progression. And I also wanted to actually execute on things. And so, you know, once I got into development, I realized that development, it has to actually change because it's one of the only sort of like careers or professions that could have a profound effect on people and communities that you don't require a license for, and there is no code of ethics for it, right? Like to be a doctor, it's do no harm, and you've got to get all these like degrees, and you've got to get all this training, and then there's continuing education and law. There's a bar, right? And so, like, if you don't meet a certain set of ethics, development, anyone can get into it, right? It's all about having money and resources and power, and it affects the community in such a profound way. And I feel like, the way communities work, the way governments give land to people who have poor moral value, it's going to have to change because people actually understand. Development used to happen in the shadows, in back rooms where deals were being made. And now I feel that people understand that their lives are at stake depending on who they work with, what developers they work with, and who's going to actually have a fiduciary responsibility to making the community better for all people, right? It can't just be for the new people coming in, and it can't also just be for the people who are there, because anything that grows and that needs to kind of evolve, you need to have a balance between respecting what's there and being able to transition in new people and bringing new life into a community. So it's a balance. And I feel that the urban planner has all the natural tools. And the last tool that they need is the ability to do a financial pro forma. And so I think development is, there's going to be a profound change in the entire career track. And it's actually going to be a career track and something that's professionalized and has a value system and a moral code. It has to, because we're building awful communities that, are becoming less and less livable, and it's because of greedy decisions that have been made, poor planning, or the planning was in place, but no, everyone ignored the planning because someone was able to go to a politician. And you wouldn't believe the politicians that can tell you, if you don't use my guy, you don't get that deal. And unfortunately, we're not that developer. We don't use someone's guy because, that's how we're going to get a deal. We use the best people, and we use the people that look like the folks in the communities that we're serving, because they can actually have a rapport. And, you'd be surprised to know that a lot of affordable housing in urban centers, which is largely Black and brown people, not many Black and brown people are developing those, and they build them to least common denominator, as if there is no dignity in it. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, they do it for the money, and they make a lot of money, and they spend a lot on PR with everything that's happened in the US. Instead of people saying, well, how do we bring about more inclusion and how do we include more people? Most of these CEOs and these major corporations, they went out and they got PR firms, not education, not let me understand where you're coming from. It's like, well, how do I get on this PR thing? I mean, like the NFL, the NBA, all of it is all PR. When the actual inclusion piece, you'll never find it. And they're hoping we forget. They hope that in 2 3 years, you know, we forget that they're not actually making more room for women, making more room for immigrants. And so, we've created a fund, and part of it is capital. We could blame the developers, but ultimately developers respond to capital. And
Mhm.
I've walked around different cities with different capital partners, and those capital partners, they're waiting for more white people in a community before they invest, even if it's healthy with people of color, even if it's healthy with immigrants. The US has a great sort of legacy of immigrants coming in. You have a lot of refugees that come to the US and they put them in awful neighborhoods. And 10 years, they've got stores, they have done so much to make the community better. And instead of government supporting that, instead of, private capital supporting that, they actually kind of subvert it. They're like, well, it's low end, it's this, it's that. They make every excuse to not invest. And I truly believe that's not in the spirit of what it means to be an American, right? The American spirit. And so one of the things we've done, and to me, I don't want to just stop at developer. I want to act at sort of like the higher level, which is at capital. Where are you investing in? Who are you investing in? And so that's why we've created this Equo fund. And Equo has Latin roots in leveling the playing field. We have committed to investing in Black and brown people, but also women and immigrants, people who, a lot of times major corporations are built on women, right? Their ideas. And they never get the credit. There's a guy that gets all the credit, and they just have a job, and they're supposed to show up and stay quiet. And we're going to change that paradigm and start to invest in the people that are actually doing it and the people that should be invested in.
The ACO fund, it's probably the first of its kind, yes?
I believe so. Making an explicit um, commitment to young talent that wants to get into development and older talent that wants to get into development for the right reason. Like, so there's a moral component, and then there's also sort of like a leveling the playing field component and access component, giving access to Black and brown folks. So Columbia University has a real estate program, which I had the honor of attending in 2003 and 2004. And in 2019, they did not have one Black person in that program. And when they went and talked to the people of color that they had accepted, and the truth is, those folks looked into Columbia and they said, in the last 10 years, we could not find any successful, Black folks who have attended the program that are now entrepreneurs. And so they went back 50, they had to go back 15 years to find me,
Wow.
and so this is Columbia University.
In New
And
York, you would think it's
in
quite a
New York
diverse,
City,
yeah,
the Columbia
city.
University, not Columbia College or anything like that. And part of the reason is when Black folks go to that program, when they come out, they don't get investment, right? So imagine you work all your life, you work very hard to get into the program, and you do well, and capital won't invest in you, and they have to admit it's because of your color, right? Because they're happy to hire you to go in front in these communities and be, oh, this is my Black person in the corporation. And the same thing they do to women. They say same thing they do to Latino folks. They're like, this is my woman, but that woman is not a partner and will never be a partner because Bob will always have like a priority over that person. And so it's a culture of inequality that we have to stop because it's actually stifling real innovation. right? Because if you look at how innovation is happening, it's only being funded, you know, at one set of people that don't represent the entire, country or the entire world. And so I think if we want innovation, if we want better communities, we're going to have to start investing in more people. And this fund is the first of its kind that says explicitly, we're going to invest in everyone, but there are three groups of people that we know have been left behind. And this is here to level that, and that's people of color, black and brown people explicitly in the United States. In other places, it may be other subgroups that don't get any investment. Um, it's women, and that's a worldwide phenomenon where women who are the innovators, and like my mom who recently passed away, just strong people that do all the work, and then a guy gets all the credit. And immigrants, people who have left their home for whatever reason. It's usually not a good reason, right? It's usually a reason of desperation and need. And when they come to a new place, the ability to work hard is something that they put on the table, but then capital doesn't recognize that. Capital, tries to actually abuse them. Capital tries in the US, we have all this about let's build a wall. The US economy would fall apart without immigrant labor. It would simply fall apart. And all this about immigrants taking resources, immigrants get nothing. They get zero resources. The simple reason to say that is to actually create fear amongst immigrants so that they want less, so that we could treat them worse. That's the only thing this whole wall thing is all about. Because the person that's saying wall, wall, wall is turning around and going to their ranch, and they're using immigrant labor. And it's typically not legal labor because they want to pay them nothing. And so, if you have an entire group of people just afraid, then you could abuse them. And I think it's abusive to do that to people, and not recognize their contribution to the country, and not to give them the opportunity to do better in this country or anywhere.
No, I think it's great when you were telling me about the fund. I mean, and the inequality and discrimination that you talk about against immigrants, it's not unique to the US, but you also see it, to certain and varying degrees, perhaps. Like, I'm based in Australia, and it's a story here as well. And I mean, the country's recognizing that we do actually need immigrants, and now that's the worry because of the pandemic and closed borders. The economy would really go down with less immigrants. And it's the same in countries in Europe and in the UK as well. So just going back to the fund, so how do you select, or how will these Black or brown women and immigrants access the fund? And are you looking at particular locations for their investments and developments?
Yeah, so we're starting with four initial cities. We're starting with Philadelphia, Baltimore, Buffalo, New York, and Richmond, Virginia. And it's a partnership with local municipalities to actually figure out who these folks are. And it's also a partnership with local universities to find out who's graduating from these programs. And then we have a set relationship with Cornell University, where I'll be teaching a course that's really a policy course and also a lab course. And that's where we're going to infuse the values of development without displacement, and also economic democracy, right? And so, how do we create communities that care about each other? And so, if you take my course and you're in the construction or development field, so let's say you're in Philadelphia, and your local housing authority says, "Oh, you should meet this person." We'll have a website, but it's really through like folks saying, "Here's someone that's trying to get in." Um, they would have to take the course, and the course, it's not for a grade. It's really, I want to get the value system um, through, so that you understand that you're going to get an investment, but there's responsibility that comes with that investment. And then we'll have local universities. So there are folks who are graduating with master's degrees in real estate, and they'll have access to it if they take the course and if they're willing to go to one of the 4 initial cities. And then it could also come from the initial cities. We have relationships. And so we'll have a website where folks can go and look at the projects that so we're also going to pick the neighborhoods because we don't want everyone spread out throughout the city. And so we want to redevelop in a concentrated way. And so we are going to study local plans and say, this one makes sense for us. And so we're going to concentrate here. And so you could say, wow, I want to develop in Buffalo, and I'm a graduate student at, Baker Real Estate Program at Cornell. I'm going to take the course. And once I graduate, I want to go and learn more about this neighborhood and potentially develop there. And, you're going to apply, and we're going to look at your, if you've taken the course, and look at your track record and your educational. So some people are going to get in through track record, whether they've been a contractor before and they've taken the course, or some people are going to be folks who they've never developed anything. They have a master's degree in real estate now, and they're ready to go and do their first project. And
Great.
so it'll all be sort of like, place-based. So if I'm in Philadelphia, the resources and the people we know in Philadelphia that are doing it, and they want to do it on their own, or, folks in Philadelphia in our network that know folks who are doing it, and they want to get in and do their first project on their own. And so a lot of people from the neighborhood or from the cities themselves, they're going to come in as contractors who are basically being contracted to renovate that home for someone else. Now we're going to joint venture, and they're going to be the principal, and they'll be the developer on their first project. And then from the university side, it's someone who's graduating, has a plan, knows how to do it at a high level, and can actually put numbers together for a large apartment building. But, just like I started with a couple small row houses, I think to really be an entrepreneur in this field, you've got to do that first small row house.
Mhm. And you started pretty much right after studying, Ernst, because your company has been around for 20 years. What was it like developing your first project?
It was one of the scariest things, but it tests you, right? You know, I thought I was going to be in school forever, so I was really good at school. So I went undergrad, master's degree, um, and then my mom really was like, "Look, we're immigrants to this country, and like, we get it. You're smart, but you've got to go do something." And she invested in my first. It was the Bank of Haiti, which was her mattress. She didn't trust banks, and so she invested $25,000, and I was able to buy 2 small row houses in Philadelphia. One I got financing on, which meant I had to go get a job, and then the other one I bought cash with a partner. And you know, I learned on the job. I learned how to be a contractor, how to do demo, and so I was hiring people and working with them, and I had my boots on. And it's very difficult because I had these 2 degrees from like these Ivy League schools, and to basically say to yourself that I'm not going to wear a suit and tie, I'm going to put boots on and go and learn this. So it's also getting some perspective and being able to start from the bottom and
Mhm.
learning a career, basically an entire path. And then it was all the mistakes I made, right? And you have to get past those mistakes and keep going until you finish, because there's certain things you learn in the books, right? In terms of how do you get a permit, in terms of how do you deal with an inspector. And the book tells you, in 30 days, they have to do this, this, and this. And you read all these things. And then the reality of it is, if they don't like you, it could be 330 days, right? And so there has to be a certain level of diplomacy and grace and deferral, like knowing that there are things that you're entitled to, but there are things that even if you're entitled to something, having a little bit of humility and being able to work with people and you had to work with, people who do demo, and you
Mhm.
had to work with bankers, you had to work with contractors, all sorts of different personalities. And it really taught me about people management and like recognizing where someone else is coming from. And even someone that didn't want to work with you, you had to work with them. And so that first experience was so eye opening. And, it really took entitlement out of my life. I was like, no, you're not entitled to a thing. When you watch how the sausage actually gets made, it's amazing. And so after going through that, this is how I get to this point now with Aquo Fund. I think you could learn development in the C suites, or you could learn it by renovating a house or building a house. And I think that's a better experience because it takes all the entitlements away, and it's you and the elements. And the elements are all the people that you're going to have to deal with. And they all have a different motivation, and they all have a different way of speaking and a different way of reacting. Uh, and you've got to master all of that. And only once you've done that will you ever be able to finish a project.
I think your business model is great and it's unique, and I hardly hear it. I mean, usually there's this impression of a big bad developer, but then, definitely it's not the case. It's just, you know, and it's nothing wrong with it, but then most development is really profit driven. But then you're able to have this good balance of, having developments and projects that are profitable, but then you're doing really good. How are you able to find investors who share that same values with you, and that, they're quite patient as well? Like, they're not looking for just a 3 or 5 year return on investment, but they're with you in terms of investing in the communities for the longer term.
So, the another lie that we're told is that you make more money if you're the big bag developer, right? You go in, and that's actually a slash and burn. I don't know if that term means anything, but it's sort of like a colonial way of making money. You go in and you just extract, and you extract as much as you can, and you take it back home, and it doesn't matter what the carnage that you've left behind. So you actually make less money that way. And all those big bad developers, if you go back, their developments don't make sense, and they basically just pass the awful development off to like someone else. Like usually it's like an insurance company that needs to make like a 4 or 5% return, and so that they'll pay a 3 cap or a 4 cap. At the end of the day, so I'll give an example. The Naval Yard in Brooklyn, someone got fired when they bought that for $30 million. Someone got fired at that corporation, and that person, should really sue them now because they've made over $30 billion. So long term, if you treat the community right, if you grow with the community, and if you have a development plan that's not about 3 to 5 years, you actually end up making more money, and not just 2, 3x, but like 1,000 times x, right? If you do what I'm saying, and you go and you value everyone, and you say, oh, there's blight here, but there's people here, let's build on that, let's invest in that, capital would make so much more money, right? And there's examples all over Brooklyn, Lower East Side in Manhattan, Miami. All these places have made 1,000 times x long term. If you go to the design district in Miami, that was awful. Little Haiti, it was awful for years and years. And now look at it. And I think part of the reason why, because we're lied to. Like Wall Street tells us you need to make the money 2 to 5 years, 2 to 3 years. And that's only making that Wall Street broker money. Investors have been lied to. Investors have been backed into a pyramid scheme, right? Instead of like, hey, what can we do for the next 10 to 15 years to improve this community and make a ton of money because it's land. And if that community is healthy, it's going to continue to give. Instead of that, they've been told by Wall Street, no, you need to invest in this REIT or that REIT, and all those, they're building awful products. There are REITs in the US, you walk into their units that they're charging you a ridiculous amount on, and they don't have nice finishes. We have better finishes in our affordable housing. To be honest with you, to be 100% honest, I'm willing to put up our affordable housing against some of these REITs in the US. So we get convinced of this because they want to make money. That small kind of class of people, they're lying to the investor. And you know the saddest thing? The biggest investors aren't these families, because these families, these very rich families, they've figured out that these folks have been lying to them. And they don't even invest in those folks. They create family offices. So whose money is actually being used? Oh, unions, right? Pension funds. That's they call that the stupid money. So they take the working class people's money and they basically displace and ruin their lives in their own communities. They don't reinvest in their own communities, right? You have 11.99 in the US and like they're working class people. Tell me how many affordable housing units they've invested in. But ask me if they've invested in Trump investments and I tell you they have. And it's because the people that manage our money and the people that the SEC allows to do that, they've lied to investors. And so that's the paradox. It's like, you know, you don't make more money being the big bag developer. It's just capital and the people directing that capital, they make more money. And so they've sold us this paradigm that, well, the big bad developer and you have to make your money in 2 to 5 years. No, it would be so much healthier for the community if the time frame was 7 to 10, maybe 10 to 15 years. That's a realistic cycle where you're not going to just run all over people. And it gives you time to also invest back in the community. What about the schools? What about the healthcare system? What about the after school programs? What about the job training? What about, the job creation? If you looked at all those things, you'd create better communities and you'd make more money. And so where do I find my investors? We're trying to find people that would have otherwise gone into a family office, but they also get that capital is lying to them, that Wall Street and all these financial, they wake up every day trying to make a buck. And the only way they can do that is to manipulate you into thinking you got to make it quick. You got to make quick money, and then they take the stupid money and they make dumb decisions that make them a lot of money, but they expect you to make it over 10 to 15 years. Because if you invest in a pension fund, if they've been down when everyone else is making, they're losing money, right? And then you've got university funds, they find ways to lose money, and no one loses their job. When they lose your money, they don't lose their job. So to me, it's also all these lies that have been manufactured about how you make money, and capital's been lied to. And so we try to find individuals that see beyond all these lies, and they've become our investors. We don't have a big investor base. We've had to be creative about how we use a small amount of private capital that's mostly our capital, mine and my business partner. And we do a lot of developments in partnership with state, local, and federal government. So we use tax credits, we do light tech projects, and we end up putting everything right back into the company and growing it in a very organic way, as opposed to, people who go and get private capital, they get really big really fast. But look at the carnage behind them. Look at the communities that they've gone in and they've put lipstick on a pig, and the projects in 2 to 3 years, they have to make that money in 2 years, because in 5 years, the project will be gone. It won't look the same. And so I would challenge anyone that says um, that the big bad developer making money in 3 or 2 to 5 years, that's a necessity. I think that's something that's manufactured, and it's manufactured because the only people it hurts are the people that aren't at that top level, and it hurts a middle class. It stops a middle class from happening. The big lie is that it's not their money that they're using. They're using your money, middle class. They're using your pension dollars, your retirement dollars, because that's just stupid money to them.
Well, now there's increasing interest as well in, highlighting real estate's positive impacts to community. It's not just, like how many square meters of extra retail or commercial space we're creating, but really the social value to the community. Have you measured more or less, or how do you even start at measuring the benefits of equitable development to people and to communities?
Yeah, and it starts with the quality of the home that you're giving them, and then it starts with giving them more than just four walls, a kitchen, and a bathroom. It starts with giving them wraparound services, like what are some of the amenities, and not just a gym or a playground, but are you helping create jobs? Are you doing after school programs? Are you thinking about health? Are you thinking about things that actually bring people together? In a lot of our housing, we help organize the tenants. So developers will never be accused of helping organize tenants, but we felt like it was necessary to organize the tenants because we want them to sit at the table and know what they're asking for, right? We want them to be able to be a stakeholder, and so you have to build up their capacity. And the other reason to organize tenants is so they can start to speak for themselves with surrounding communities. Because a lot of times those surrounding communities, they say those people, but they never got to know who those people are. And so to us, um, development can't be this single-sided or faceted thing of let's build a building. There are people there. It's no longer let's go and negotiate with the farmer and we're in the middle of nowhere. And in fact, we're coming back into urban areas and we're de-slumming those areas, or we're going into those areas and saying, okay, we need to invest. And one of our tools is density, right? So if density is going to be a tool for revitalizing a neighborhood, uh, that means people on top of people. And so you've got to teach people how to live together. You've got to actually start having that conversation early on. And then public transport has to be a big part of it, right? Out of necessity, I think people use public transport in New York, but in other cities, people still expect the car to be like their primary source of transportation. And all those things have to change, and it's all perception. Like if we build 10 car highways in the middle of like Main Street, well, 10 cars are going to drive down those streets. But if we build for other things, if we say this is where people go, and if we prioritize people, right, they're a lot more livable.
So you live in Baltimore, and for those who are listening, Ernst has invested so much in his own city. So the last time we saw each other, Ernst, it was in Detroit when you were doing the advisory panel work in ULI, and you were telling me about a development that included repurposing a church. Can you tell us about that, please?
Yeah, so it's we there was an it's more than a church. It was like a half campus, and and I grew up Catholic in Haiti, and so you had the sanctuary, the girls' school, the boys' school, the parish hall. You have like an entire campus, and this was an entire half block, and we repurposed it into apartments. And then with the sanctuary, we didn't want to break it up into apartments because it was such a 15,000 square foot sanctuary. Only the Catholics can build things that beautiful, and you can't actually recreate it. And so we wanted to preserve it. And the like white use can you do in a space like that? And so when we bought the place from the Archdiocese, we basically asked for permission to do a brewery in there. And we did this brewery and we called it Ministry of Brewing. And we didn't want it to just be a place that we manufacture and, bring people together to have beer. We also wanted it to be a place where we could train people that basically don't have access to the brewing industry, which is kind of like wine in the US back in the 70s, I guess, when California wines um, kind of started to compete with the French and the Italian and the Spanish wines. It's a burgeoning boutique industry. And so not only do we make great beer and it's this beautiful space, but we also train, again, Black and brown folks how to brew beer and not just be consumers, but understand vertically integrate their understanding of the industry as not just consumers, but also producers in that industry as well. And recently, I think we won most beautiful brewery in the state of Maryland. And so that was a very proud moment, but it was going into the community. And this was actually a partnership with the community. It wasn't like we, went in there and didn't talk to them about it, but they loved the idea, supported the idea, and they support the beer as well. And right before COVID, it was this gathering place. And I have pictures of like little babies crawling. We had a kid area where kids played. It was such a packed place. And now it can't be as packed because of COVID, but we're hoping for a return to normalcy because it really brought all of Baltimore together, especially that neighborhood. It was like the neighborhood place, and it was all folks. You could see a teenager hanging out with their friends, having non-alcoholic cider, and you could see the parents right there, all in one place. And there's not many places like that in the U.S., right? In a lot of European cities, you have the palazzo where you could have the parents and the kids and everything. This was sort of like an interior palazzo where the entire family can come. And, we need more places like that in the US. And, I would venture to say you had Democrats and Republicans. Everyone was in this place. And I can't wait to get back to having it fully. And I'm happy to send you some pictures and some videos of that space as well.
These public places, people places, some call it third places. Um, Obviously, they're going to change and have changed in the short term, will change in the longer term. Um, how do you think investments, your own and developments as a whole, will change moving forward because of the pandemic?
So I looked at the pandemic. The pandemic has revealed a lot of pre-existing conditions, right? And so where there was inequality in healthcare, it revealed that. Where there was, disparities and sort of like resources in a community, it revealed that. Where you had people who didn't care about anyone but themselves, it revealed that. Where you had people who couldn't do simple things for the greater good, it revealed that. It was just one of these biblical tests that we all had to go through as an entire country, and certain places did really well. I mean, when you look at certain cities in like South Korea, for instance, that are 10, 20 times more dense than New York City, and to look at they didn't stop, right? There was no such thing as a lockdown, national lockdown in some of these places. It was like wash your hands, cover your mouth. If you're sick, don't go out. And
Keep
so
your
what it revealed
distance.
about the US is that we're incredibly selfish and individualistic, right? It's about me, how I feel, and not about my neighbor, not about, it's just, and it didn't ring home for anyone until personal. I mean, I was always against a lockdown. I didn't actually want a lockdown to happen. I actually wanted people to just be responsible. And so if you read about our brewery, we're very responsible and when we reopen and how we take care of people. Um, but a lockdown was not the answer. I think the lockdown has actually hurt communities of color, women, and immigrants the most, right? Because they had the least to start with. And now the gaps that we were starting to fill, the income gaps that we were starting to fill have just widened again. And they've actually gotten wider. And so the long term impact of COVID-19 will be that it set the clock back for Black and Brown people in the US. I would say it set the clock back for Black and Brown people, for women and immigrants, and especially Black and Brown people, because you can tell someone is Black and Brown. And so that's why racism is so poignant in that community, right? It's like you can go out and, police, when they see a young Black man and they see a young white man, the young white man could be dressed like a bum, but immediately they think, well, maybe his father is a banker or maybe his father is something. While the young Black man could have a suit on and it's like, oh, he's probably going for a job interview or something like that. They assume that person is nothing. And that's because of systematic racism in our country. And guess what? Capital does that all the time. They drive through when they're going to go kick the tires for a project. If they see Black people, they don't want to invest in those communities. They don't want to put their hospitals in those communities. They don't want to put their supermarkets in those communities. I mean, Magic Johnson was once told by all these folks that, Harlem has no value. And then when he opened a Starbucks in Harlem, it was the highest grossing one. And so he debunked that, but you don't see that being replicated. And so I think COVID-19, it's revealed those disparities, but it's also deeply widened them, right? And so you've got folks that were already behind that are now 10 times worse off. And that's why a lockdown doesn't make any sense. You know, like the NBA didn't stop, the NFL hasn't stopped, and those folks make a lot of money. But they're saying, and they could have gotten, so the other places that have been successful, it's been testing and people being responsible to be counted on as a society to do the minimum things. We never picked up testing in this country. We never did. It was never a priority. Why not? Why not? And the jobs that are shut down, being able to work from home is a luxury. Being able to be on your computer and move anywhere, and like people don't even get that's a luxury. And it's like, well, it's just gonna widen that. And so instead, and it's because the people who have money have been able to do that. Our government says, well, it's not a priority to test. It's not a priority to do anything because the people that we actually care about, they're okay. They could go to Martha's Vineyard. They could go to the beach and everything and work from there. I got on the phone today, and it's a young Black female lawyer. She was like, I might go and work from DR, Dominican Republic, or I could go and work from this. I mean, she was naming all these exotic places, and those folks don't care about the person that has to go to a factory, the person that has to get up and go to a restaurant. They gave them a little bit up front, was just to pacify the people. But long term, there's going to be real pain and damage that I think is going to make communities more vulnerable because they're going to have to sell grandmother's row house in order to just get by. And the final nail in the coffin of people of color owning property in cities is going to be COVID-19, right? Because they're not going to be able to own. In this whole pandemic, home sales are up for young yuppies, basically. You didn't have any of the tech giants step in to do anything, to create technology to help. Why not? So I think there's a major failure. I wonder if Andrew Carnegie, if John D. Rockefeller, if they had acted this way, if we would have allowed that. We wouldn't have. But we're so kind of like, we're sitting back watching Netflix while these, tech giants are doing nothing. They let election meddling happen. They've taken the voice of the people and made it nothing, and they're not reinvesting in people. Like Facebook, Twitter, all these folks should have been working on an app, whatever they do, or working on a system to actually help poor communities deal with COVID. They did nothing. They did absolutely nothing. They give back minimally, and where they could be using technology to do something, they sat back and they said, "Nope, not for us." But they want to give you an app so you can I've heard it described that all the technology coming out of Silicon Valley, it's about like a young white male who still wants like all the services from their mom. It's like, how do I get my food? How do I get like, that's all the technology we're getting. But they could actually be working on real things. And this was an opportunity for them to do that. And they failed. They failed miserably. And they're not even, all the money that they're not paying taxes on, they didn't even invest that in these communities. So I don't know what we do as a society. Like, there's got to be some sort of leveling the playing field when it comes to those folks.
Well, you're really active in helping communities, not just in terms of real estate development, but you try to change early on people's lives early on and influence them early on. So you're really active in the MIT CoLab and Oxfam UK initiatives. Can you tell us more about that, please?
So, so Dana Cunningham at the CoLab, it's called the Community Innovators Lab. And so it's exactly what I was talking about. Innovation is not happening to help communities. Innovation is happening to just make the lives of people who are already easier, right? And so Community Innovators Lab, that's where I get my soul kind of like healed, because I'm with a bunch of other people who want to find solutions, whether it's having more co-ops, whether it's you know devising and learning more about what it means to be economic democracy. So the CoLab is where I personally learn a different language of how to approach people and how to approach communities and different ideas, because I don't get that through like a traditional developer network. And I have my traditional developer network that I will hang out with, but it doesn't fulfill who I am. And that's someone that wants to have a positive effect on community, who wants to innovate. So we're also developing this thing called Care House. And so that's through, I met this really talented architect from MIT, Rafi Siegel, through CoLab, and a really talented artist out of MIT. And, the three of us, or the four partners in that partnership, we're trying to look at housing for elderly people that don't want to go into elderly housing. And then how people who are the caregivers basically get set aside and they do all the work, but some company is making all the money. And the care house is where we can create a community within a community. I wouldn't have been able to be around such people without the CoLab, right? And so the CoLab is where I get to really innovate. And it's what tech should be doing. They should be innovating for communities, because right now they're innovating for like one type of individual. And why is that? Because that one type of individual is the only individual that gets to be an executive at these tech companies. And they're the only ones that get to be executives with the capital. The venture capital is coming from them. So of course they're going to think a new eating app or a new dating app is the thing to do, right? They're not going to think about, well, how do seniors you live with caregivers? How do we make sure that we do retirements for caregivers? And how do we make sure that kids are getting an education and all this? They're not looking at that because they're just innovating for themselves and they're completely missing the boat. And I think, you know, I call it out not because I need them to do anything. I call them out to say there are those of us out there, like the folks at CoLab at MIT, that are looking at things a different way. And we're hoping to shift capital. Once we've developed this language, we're developing these apps, we're developing these paradigm shifts. We are hoping that real capital um, basically starts to support these kind of innovations because what's happening is what's getting innovated right now, there'll be no society for us to use it in, right? If we let society fall apart, and in some respect, we're letting society fall apart because of all these inequalities, because we're not recognizing people, because we're letting cities kind of just go in these wild, we're maximizing income again, but the cities are hurting. They're becoming less and less livable, right? If we let society fall apart, who cares if that dating app works, right? Like, I think the way COVID happened, that was part of us letting society fall apart when they could have developed apps. They have all our information, right? They data mine us to death. If they really wanted to, they could have helped prevent a lot. And I actually put a lot of it on them because if they can know what I like, and when I go onto an app, email me the right commercial and all this stuff, they could have helped a lot more with COVID-19. But they didn't know how to monetize that, or they didn't have the soul to say, this is the kind of innovations we should be doing. They didn't want to redirect that because, they can't see beyond themselves. And so I see that as a failure in technology. And I see places like MIT CoLab and other universities have similar things. And I know Cornell is trying to develop a similar thing with their tech campus in New York City. Cornell is really pushing, especially the School of Architecture, Art, and Planning, where I graduated from. Um, I think it's an opportunity for us to develop innovations for communities. Carmi, I also want to just thank you for the work that you do. You're incredibly brilliant. Like meeting you in Detroit, I'm like, you not only get urban planning, you're a leader in it and you're innovating in urban planning. And beyond that, I also think that you're willing to have the uncomfortable conversations. And I know that I made a lot of people uncomfortable in Detroit because I wanted to talk about, well, why are these foundations just giving each other money and investing in each other? And everyone felt uncomfortable, but it was the truth. They felt uncomfortable because it was the truth. And lo and behold, 2 years later, look at the mess we are in with Black Lives Matters, with the Me Too movement. Like, look at the mess that we're in. And we haven't even started because we're still dealing with who's going to be in office after tomorrow. Is it Trump or is it Biden? But both choices don't address those things, in my opinion. And you were one of the few people that wanted to hear more. And, it was interesting because you had an international perspective, but I think you could see, and I, I do work I'm trying to do work in Turin, Italy, because in Turin, you have a lot of migrants, and they still call folks migrants whose kids were born in Italy and have grown up in Italy, and they're still like, well, the migrants. Well, certain Italian families won't rent to them. And when they do rent to them, it's really, really bad conditions. And so, I found a group in Italy, these wonderful Italian folks that have a heart and want to create quality housing for them. And we're going to partner with them to do that. So all these things that are happening at local levels, they do manifest themselves internationally. And then,
Mm-hmm.
I also think about France and what's happening with the Muslim French community there. And like, I've got to think that's like rooted in a way in, people that haven't had opportunity. One of the things that I thank my parents for when we left Haiti, because in 1985, Duvalier was being kicked out of office, and we knew there was going to be turmoil in the country. I thank the Lord they came to the United States of America and didn't go to France. And I say that because in France, it's not just a glass ceiling. It's like ironclad. If you're in the bond, like if you're an immigrant, especially a Haitian immigrant, you will never get to be there. And I knew, like, my parents spoke French and they could read and write in French, and they came to a country they didn't even speak the language. But what we had in the US is if you worked hard, you could work your way up. And so I think France needs to look at itself and say, can the Muslim, like, we want them to integrate, right? We want them to
Mm-hmm.
become French, but can they really become French? And if they can't, they've got a real problem in their hands. I'll
Yeah.
leave it at that. But thank you so much for your brilliance, and congratulations on this wonderful show. And I can't wait to hear more.
Thank you so much, Ernst. I'm so sure you've inspired so many. I mean, me again, it's so nice to have a conversation with you about this. And I know it could be quite challenging, but please keep doing the work that you do.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Have a
Ernst.
good evening.
Have a good evening.
Thank you very much for listening to this episode of Beyond Places. I would love to hear from you. Feel free to connect with me on social media and carmipalafox@gmail.com. If you enjoy this podcast, please do subscribe. I would really appreciate it. Bye and see you again next week.